Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan. We've got a lot to get to today, including the pretty impressive debut of The Wild Robot and a very unimpressive debut of Francis Ford Coppola's epic Megalopolis. Before we do that, though, just another quick reminder that memberships are now open here on the channel. If you choose to become a channel member, you'll get a badge next to your name, you'll get free custom emoji, early access to select videos, and if you want to find out more, there's a link in the description. Depending on your browser, there may be a button up there that just allows you to join. But I'd love to have you be a part of the community, and I'm also looking to build and expand and do new things with the channel as we end this year and go into next year. So if you want to become a member, we'd love to have you. All right, let's jump into the top 10 for this past weekend. And at number 1 was The Wild Robot, which kind of over-indexed the expectations, or at least was on the high end of expectations, with a $35 million opening. That comes in just ahead of the original Puss in Boots and just behind B-Movie as far as DreamWorks Animation openings, although that is unadjusted for inflation. But we'll see how it does in the weeks ahead. The audience response was great, the critical reviews were very strong, and this was produced for a reported budget of around $78 million, which is a very responsible budget number, especially for a family animated film. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, which was another DreamWorks film that was critically acclaimed, opened much, much lower, albeit in a different time of year, right around the holidays, and was really able to leg it out to an impressive number domestically as well as around the world. So it'll be interesting to see what word of mouth does for The Wild Robot, but it's got a pretty clear path as far as the family market until we get to Thanksgiving and the holiday season. And it's a movie I'm rooting for. It's a movie I really liked. I gave it a good review, which you can see right here on the channel. And yeah, we'll see what The Wild Robot does. I have a suspicion that it should hold well in the next few weeks, but you never know at the box office. In second place was Beetlejuice, which continues to hold well. It dropped just 38.2% from last weekend for another $16 million. Its domestic total is now at $250 million. Transformers 1 had a bit of a disappointing drop in weekend number 2. It dropped 62.2% for a $9.3 million second weekend. Its domestic total is now at $39.1 million. That drop-off is nearly identical percentage-wise to Transformers Age of Extinction and The Last Knight, but it held a little bit better than Rise of the Beasts, which came out last summer. Of course, all of those films opened significantly higher than Transformers 1, and it looks like the movie may have been a victim of another animated film hitting the marketplace the week after, as well as losing essentially all of its premium screens, all of the IMAX, etc. Those went to Megalopolis and The Wild Robot this weekend. So, if you were rooting for Transformers 1, and that is a movie that also had strong audience response, a bit of a disappointing week 2, and we'll see where we go from here. In fourth place is a film from India called Devara Part 1, which is a Telugu language film from writer-director Koratala Siva, starring RRR's N.T. Ramarao Jr. It's a story about 2 generations of pirates who fight to control their village, and it's another strong debut for a film from India, as we have seen in the last few years. A top 5 debut and over $5 million. That's impressive here stateside. In fifth place is Speak No Evil, which had another pretty good hold in week number 3. It dropped 25.8% for $4.3 million. Its domestic total is now at $28.1 million. In sixth place, we have Megalopolis from director Francis Ford Coppola, which he put into theaters. He self-funded the film and did not get the financial result I think he was expecting, anticipating, or hoping for. Probably not the critical result either. A $4 million opening against a budget reportedly of $120 million is historically low, and we'll break that number down in a few minutes. But, Francis Ford Coppola's had this movie in his head for decades. If his goal was to get the movie into theaters, he accomplished that goal. But if his goal was to get any kind of return on his own investment, that's not going to happen. In seventh place is Deadpool and Wolverine, which spends a 10th week in the top 10 with a 30.4% drop from last weekend and a $2.6 million total. Coming in eighth place was My Old Ass, not Mild Ass, the movie My Old Ass, which in its third weekend expanded into wide release and had a 705% increase in business from last weekend. It brought in $2.2 million. Its domestic total is now at $2.8 million. In ninth place was another disappointment from Lionsgate as far as distribution goes, Never Let Go. It dropped 50.6% for a $2.2 million second weekend. Its domestic total is now at $8.2 million. And then in 10th place was The Substance, which for a movie as divisive as it is, had a pretty good hold from weekend 1 to weekend 2. It dropped just 43.6% with a $1.8 million weekend. Its domestic total is now at $6.8 million. million. So let's talk about some of these movies that were in the top 10, and we will start with The Wild Robot. I don't have a big, huge grid for DreamWorks Animation yet. I'm going to try to work on that for next week's show as we track how The Wild Robot is doing compared to other DreamWorks animated films. But what we do know is that it was the second best opening of the year for a non-sequel or remake, behind It Ends With Us, which opened to $50 million. Then we have The Wild Robot, which comes in just ahead of If's opening back in the summer. If opened to $33.7 million. The Wild Robot is estimated at $35 million. Bob Marley, One Love is at number 4, and The Fall Guy is at number 5. People have commented about the Garfield movie being on this chart. I included it because it is not a direct sequel or a direct remake of a specific Garfield film. I understand that it is a borderline case, but I opted to keep it on the chart. But pretty good for The Wild Robot as far as movies that are not part of an existing cinematic franchise. Also, I wanted to talk about Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice, which was the second place film of the weekend. It is now only $1 million or so behind 1989's Batman to be the second highest grossing film domestically, and we'll see where it ranks as far as Tim Burton's worldwide filmography later on in the show. So Beetlejuice continues to climb up that list. Transformers 1, when you look at the Transformers domestic box office overall as a franchise, again, unless it has a huge recovery, that 60% drop seems to indicate that we could very well be looking at the first Transformers film to fall short of $100 million domestically since the first Transformers film, and I'm not talking about Michael Bay's movie, I'm talking about The Transformers, the movie. It's got to do about $61 million more at the box office in order to eclipse that $100 million mark. I don't know if we're going to get there, especially if it continues to hold as it has done or as it did this past weekend. But again, there's a bit of a runway here. It's a family film. It had good response. It could leg out, but I think it's a very difficult task for the movie at this point. And then we get to Megalopolis. I mentioned that it had an historically low opening, and it was actually, according to my research, the second worst opening ever for a film that was budgeted at over $100 million and had a release on over 1,000 screens. At number 1 still is The Adventures of Pluto Nash, which is just an historically massive bomb starring Eddie Murphy. It had an opening of $2.1 million off of a budget reportedly of $100 million. In second place is Megalopolis with a $4 million opening off a budget of $120 million. That puts it ahead of The Last Duel back in 2021, which opened to $4.7 million off a budget of $100 million. Yes, this was during the recovery period of the pandemic, but also in the window where this movie came out, you had movies like Spider-Man No Way Home coming out and doing a lot of money. So there could be a bit of a COVID asterisk there, but it still does make the list. In fourth place is Missing Link, which opened to $5.9 million off a budget of $100 million. And then in fifth place is Jack Black's Gulliver's Travels. Remember when they did that movie about, 15 years ago? It opened to $6.3 million off of a $112 million budget, although keep in mind this was a rare Saturday release. The studio opted to open it on Christmas Day, which was a Saturday that year. So that is basically just a Saturday-Sunday gross for Gulliver's Travels. Now, there are some movies like Strange Magic and The King's Man that could potentially have been on this list, but I went with movies that I had multiple sources confirming the budget at $100 million or more, not at like 80 to 100 or 90 to 100. But the overall fact remains, regardless of which movies are included on this chart and which ones aren't, that Megalopolis is an historic flop. It is an all-time box office bomb. And there were a lot of people that were criticizing the studios and distributors earlier this year who chose not to pick up Megalopolis, not to pick up and front the marketing costs that Francis Ford Coppola wanted paid that weren't eventually paid. And I think what this shows is that from a business standpoint, this was a good decision. It's going to be a huge money loser. Any money that a studio had put into Megalopolis to market it, to distribute it, they would have lost. People talk about Lionsgate. Lionsgate's having a terrible year, but they just served as the actual distributor in the sense that they got the movie into theaters. They're actually going to walk away with a little bit of money because they're being paid a fee in order to get the movie out and get it marketed, etc. So they're not really on the hook for any of these costs. It's all Francis Ford Coppola. He took the financial risk and nobody really bailed him out, but that was his choice. That was his decision. And from an economic standpoint, the studios and distributors, I think, made a good decision by not sinking some of their own money into this. I'm all for movies hitting theaters and I'm all for people getting to see these things, but this was just not something that was ever commercially viable, and we're seeing that play out this past weekend. One side note on Megalopolis, though, I did my review of the movie last week, and it was a film that a lot of people were interested in, and I'm grateful that people chose to see what I thought about the film. But as I was going through the plot and the premise, etc., I mentioned one cast member in particular, and that cast member's name is Giancarlo Esposito.
Hello, my name is Giancarlo Esposito.
Now, I try to keep my ear to the ground as far as pronunciation goes because I have a last name that's often mispronounced. People say Muriel, people say Morel, and so I want to make sure that I am according people the respect of pronouncing their name properly if I can, and if I don't, I try to correct it. And I had actually seen something that surprised me because I had been saying his name, as most people have, as Giancarlo Esposito. But then I saw 2 or 3 other clips of the man himself saying his name, Giancarlo Esposito. So, stupid me, in my review, I decided to attempt to say it properly. I didn't quite get it, but I got close, without making a caveat or an asterisk. And boy, did I hear about it. I'm not talking about 1 or 2 comments here or there. I am talking dozens of comments about Giancarlo Esposito and how I said his name. In a review about one of the most stimulating, as far as I think conversationally, movies of the year, the thing I heard about the most was how I said the name of Giancarlo Esposito.
Hello, my name is Giancarlo Esposito.
And not in a positive way. A lot of people saying, how dare you? And I'm not exaggerating here. How dare you? You should be ashamed of yourself. You've lost all credibility. You shouldn't be talking about movies if you don't know how to pronounce his name. More than one comment that literally said his name is pronounced Esposito, like phonetically. Here's the thing though. It's not.
Giancarlo Esposito, 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 Esposito.
And here's the thing, people jumped on that immediately. I put a pinned comment in that review with a video link to Giancarlo Esposito saying his own name, and yet I was still inundated by people saying, you idiot, you moron, you hack. I was more right about it than they were, but they continued to just assume that they were right. And just, I mean, comment after comment after comment. It was absolutely insane. I even had 3 or 4 different people who I replied to and said, actually, this is how he pronounces his own name, who said, that doesn't matter. This is how it's pronounced, even though I was providing video evidence about how the guy pronounces his own name.
Esposito.
Anyway, this is a box office show, but you get a little bit of a Dan rant as a side. My main point being, I am doing my best to say the name of Giancarlo Esposito the way he says it, not the way I and most other people have been saying it traditionally. And if you're going to yell at somebody on the internet and say, oh, you're incompetent, you're a hack, and you don't know what you're talking about, maybe check first to make sure that you know what you're talking about.
Giancarlo Esposito.
Okay, Dan rant over. Let's get back to the box office. One quick note on Deadpool and Wolverine, which is still in the top 10. That makes 10 weeks in the top 10 and ties it with Despicable Me 4 and Kung Fu Panda 4 as the second longest run in the top 10 this year. If Deadpool and Wolverine can stick around for one more week, it will tie Inside Out 2 at 11 weeks as the longest run in the domestic top 10 for 2024. And speaking of the top 10, we had 4 movies that dropped out of the top 10 this week. Alien Romulus is out after 6 weeks. Reagan is out after 4 weeks. Am I Racist is out of the top 10 after 2 weeks. And after a special limited engagement, Jungkook, I Am Still is out of the top 10 after 1 week. Looking at the biggest theater count changes for this past weekend, The Killer's Game lost the most at 2,447 theaters gone, remaining in just 176 theaters. It is the latest Lionsgate film to just completely crash out of theaters in week number 3, and I think that we're probably going to see another one in the near future. The second biggest theater count change was actually an addition. We see this sometimes, which is My Old Ass, which added 1,357 theaters for a total of 1,390. Then we had Alien Romulus, which lost 775 theaters. It's now out of wide release. It's now still playing in 575 theaters. Speak No Evil lost 714 theaters for a total of 2,661. And the 10th anniversary re-release of Whiplash lost 504 theaters in its second weekend. It stayed in 191 theaters around the country. And speaking of the most theaters lost in one weekend, The Killer's Game now comes in third as far as 2024 goes, with its 2,447 theaters gone. That comes in behind The Crow at 2,456, and this year's champion, Afraid, which lost 2,597 theaters in week 3. Fly Me to the Moon gets bumped down one spot to number 4, and The Color Purple rounds out the top 5. Now, all 5 of these films have been 2,000 plus theater losers in week number 3. Looking at what I like to call our road to recovery, the red line is the box office weekend average from the years 2021 to 2023. The blue line is the weekend average from 2015 to 2019, and the dotted black line is what we've done each weekend this year. And you can see that this past weekend, we're basically where we have been, but not quite where we were traditionally pre-pandemic as far as the total box office for the weekend. That's largely because The Wild Robot did a lot of heavy lifting, whereas in other weekends there have been multiple movies that maybe didn't open as big as The Wild Robot, but contributed more overall to the box office. For example, last year at this time we had Saw X and The Creator and some other releases all coming out on the same weekend. The highest grossing film for the 2015 to 2019 window was the release of Hotel Transylvania 2 back in 2015, I believe. And the highest grossing film for the 2021 to 2023 window was Paw Patrol: The Mighty Movie, which also opened on this weekend last year and helped to contribute to that overall higher box office. Turning now from the domestic marketplace to the worldwide marketplace, let's look at the top 5 films internationally, which is all markets outside of the US and Canada. And the number 1 film on the international circuit was Devara Part 1, which brought in $27.8 million. That puts it ahead of Transformers 1, which brought in $16.6 million total. That puts it at number 2. Beetlejuice comes in at number 3 at $13.6 million. The Wild Robot is rolling out a little bit slowly as far as worldwide release, so it comes in 4th place at $9.8 million. And then Speak No Evil rounds out the top 5 at $5.2 million. When you take those international numbers, you combine them with our domestic numbers, we get our top 5 films worldwide. And the number 1 movie worldwide is The Wild Robot at $44.8 million. That's a 554% increase in business from last weekend, and that is driven a lot by its domestic debut. Many other markets will be getting it in the weeks ahead. Devara Part 1 brings in $32.9 million worldwide. That's good enough for 2nd place. Beetlejuice comes in 3rd at $29.6 million. That's a 31.4% drop off from last weekend. Transformers 1 has a 33.6% drop from last week. That's mainly because it continues to roll out in other markets. So its decline was a little bit less steep worldwide as compared to domestically. It had a $25.9 million worldwide weekend. And then Speak No Evil comes in 5th place at $9.5 million, a 27.4% drop from its performance last weekend. And I mentioned that Beetlejuice has been moving up Tim Burton's worldwide gross list. It's now at number 4. It's ahead of 2001's Planet of the Apes and is angling to get that number 3 spot where 1989's Batman currently sits. Although keep in mind that is an unadjusted number for Batman 89, so it made $411 million worldwide in 1989 money. That's really impressive. However, I think that Beetlejuice is going to get to that number 3 spot. We'll see if it can get another $100 million or so in order to get to number 2, where Charlie and the Chocolate Factory currently sits at $475.8 million. But it's not going to get close to Tim Burton's highest grossing worldwide film, which is, of course, Alice in Wonderland, which mind-bogglingly made over $1 billion with its 3D release in a post-Avatar world. We've got a lot more to break down, but before we do, I'm going to thank the sponsor for this week's show. This video is brought to you by Chubbies. It may be fall, but I'm still thinking back on the fun I had this summer, which included a trip to the beach and my first time wearing stuff from Chubbies. I had swim trunks that were super comfortable and looked good to boot, and I'm still using my Friday shirt on the days when the temperatures are still warm. But let's face it, summer is dead. And as the leaves start to fall and the temperatures drop, your wardrobe needs to catch up. Luckily, Chubbies is here to save the day. Yes, Chubbies is great for the summer, but they also have ultra cozy, comfortable clothes that'll keep you feeling warm and looking better as the mercury drops. From flannel-lined shirts to warm pullovers to cozy quarter zips, Chubbies has all the fall-ready threads for those night football games sitting in those cold, cold metal bleachers. Even if you're a year-round shorts wearer, and they do exist, pairing chubby shorts with a fall sweater or cozy jacket is the perfect complement to those weatherproof thighs. This fall, elevate your style, your confidence, and hey, who knows, maybe your entire fundamental being with Chubbies. And would you look at that? For a limited time, our friends at Chubbies are giving fans of the show 20% off with the promo code DAN20 at checkout at chubbyshorts.com. That's 20% off your order with the promo code DAN20. Support our show and tell them we sent you. This fall, make the most of every moment with Chubbies. Shop now and fall into comfort, one stylish piece at a time. All right, let's take a look at some of the specialty charts, and we're going to start with a couple of revisions from last week's show. There's always some movies that report a little bit late, so I want to make sure that I bring you the most accurate information. Looking first at the per theater average from last week, the number one movie actually was a late reporter, which was a movie called A Mistake, starring Elizabeth Banks as a surgeon in a medical drama directed by Sunshine Cleaning's Christine Jeffs. It brought in $20,656 in one theater, which was enough for that number one spot. A Different Man came in second place at $12,366 per theater in 4 theaters, with My Old Ass in its original limited release coming in third place, Happy Clothes, a film about Patricia Field, coming in fourth, and Beetlejuice rounding out the top 5. Also, a quick revision to the limited release chart from last week's show. The top 3 remain the same. The only difference really is that Don to Don First Encounter brought in about $74,000 in its second week of release, which was good enough for number 4 on the limited release chart, so it now reflects that. Let's move now to this past weekend's per theater average chart, which was dominated by Saturday Night. Jason Reitman's behind-the-scenes look at the first episode of Saturday Night Live. It opened in 5 theaters and brought in $53,000 per theater. That's a very impressive per theater debut. It hits wide release next Friday. I'm going to be hitting the road to see it this week, so I'll have a review here on the channel later this week. And second place was The Wild Robot, which brought in $8,833 per theater in each of its 3,962 theaters. Devara Part 1 comes in third at $5,385 per theater, followed by Beetlejuice at $4,216 per theater, and A Different Man, which expanded to 23 theaters and brought in $2,784 per theater. And when we look at the highest per theater averages of the year, Saturday Night actually puts up the second best average. It comes in behind Kinds of Kindness, which opened to $75,000 per theater in 5 theaters back in June. Saturday Night brings in $53,000 per theater in 5 theaters this past weekend. That's better than the opening weekend per theater average of Deadpool and Wolverine back in July. It also is above The Taste of Things, which opened to $43,000 per theater back in February, and Dee Dee, which opened to $41,000 per theater on the same weekend as Deadpool and Wolverine. So this bodes well potentially for the mainstream buzz around Saturday Night, and we'll see how it does this upcoming weekend and then when it hits wide release on October 11th. Looking at the top films in limited release, this would be 1,000 theaters or fewer. It is yet another election season, which means that Dinesh D'Souza has another film hitting theaters. This one was called Vindicating Trump, which played in 813 theaters and brought in $762,000. In third place was Lee, the wartime photographer biopic starring Kate Winslet, which brought in $723,000 in 854 theaters. In third place is Azrael, which played in 754 theaters and brought in $300,000. It's a movie about a young woman fighting to survive in a post-apocalyptic world where no one can speak. The movie stars Samara Weaving and is directed by E.L. Katz, who I think made an underrated movie called Cheap Thrills back in 2013. Saturday Night comes in fourth place with $265,000 in just 5 theaters. And rounding out the top 5 is the film Faith of Angels, which is playing in 324 theaters. It brought in $160,000. Faith of Angels is about a man who turns to faith in order to find a young boy who's lost in a mine. Looking now at the seasonal box office chart, this is the fall holiday box office, so this is everything post-Labor Day to the end of the year. At number 1 is Beetlejuice at $250.1 million, followed by Transformers 1, which is up to $39.1 million, although it was nearly outgrossed by The Wild Robot in its opening weekend alone. The Wild Robot brought in $35 million to debut in third place. Speak No Evil moves down 1 spot to number 4. Am I Racist moves down to number 5. The Substance moves up 2 spots to number 6. Never Let Go moves down to number 7. Devara Part 1 enters the chart at number 8 with $5.6 million. The Killer's Game drops 4 spots to number 9. The Greatest of All Time moves down 3 spots to number 10. And dropping out of the top 10 are The Front Room and Jungkook, I Am Still. No change this week on the 2024 annual domestic box office chart. Inside Out 2 is at number 1 at $652.9 million. Deadpool and Wolverine, it looks like, will be a close number 2 there. It's currently at $631.2 million. Despicable Me 4 is in 3rd. Dune Part 2 is in 4th. Twisters is in 5th. Beetlejuice is lurking and looks likely to hit the top 5. It's at number 6 at $250.1 million. And the top 10 is rounded out by Godzilla Kong the New Empire, Kung Fu Panda 4, Bad Boys Ride or Die, and Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. There really wasn't a whole lot interesting as far as the box office flashback segment for this week, so let's go ahead and move on from the box office to the world of streaming. And let's look first at the latest numbers that we have from Netflix. These are global viewing figures for the week of September 16th through the 22nd. And the number 1 program on Netflix for that range was the Netflix original film Uglies, which was in its 2nd week of release. It brought in 26.82 million views. In second place is Rebel Ridge, which continues to have an impressive run with 16.68 million views. Then in third place, we have Officer Black Belt in its 2nd week of release at 15.69 million views. In fourth place was the debut of Ryan Murphy's latest crime series, Monsters, Lyle and Eric Menendez, a very buzzy show which brought in 12.26 million views. And when the new numbers come out tomorrow, I think that we're probably going to see that number go up. In fifth place was The Perfect Couple at 10.37 million views, followed by Gifted, a non-Netflix original film, which came in 6th place. It's a movie starring Chris Evans. It had 9.94 million views. Emily in Paris Season 4 is at number 7 at 9.21 million views as it works through the second part of that 4th season. Into the Fire, The Lost Daughter stays in the top 10 at number 8 at 7.42 million views. Then we have the debut of the original Netflix film Sector 36 at number 9 at 6.15 million views. And one of Netflix's awards hopefuls called His Three Daughters, which opens in 10th place at 4.11 million views. And when we look at the list of the most watched movies on Netflix this year, Rebel Ridge continues to move up the chart. It is now the 6th most watched film of the year at 86.45 million views, bumping down A Family Affair, Beverly Hills Cop, Axel F, Atlas, and Mother of the Bride. It's interesting that you have a huge, high-budgeted, high-profile film like Beverly Hills Cop Axel F, which is currently getting beaten by much lower-profile films like Rebel Ridge, just an adjustment that I think Netflix is making to its programming. The big money doesn't necessarily always mean the biggest views. And when we look at the most watched Netflix shows of the year, Emily in Paris Season 4 is back in the top 10. It briefly was demoted just a little bit as that extra viewing time for the second part of the 4th season was added, but it's back at number 10 at 42.25 million views. That drops out Money Heist Berlin Season 1. The Perfect Couple also moves up to number 7 on this list at 52.55 million views. That drops down Three Body Problems Season 1 and American Nightmare Season 1. The top 6 remain the same, led of course by Bridgerton at 105.89 million views for Season 3. And looking at the overall most watched Netflix programs of 2024, Rebel Ridge enters the chart at number 9. It's now the 9th highest watched global program across all of Netflix according to their reported data this year. That bumps A Family Affair down to number 10, and it bumps Beverly Hills Cop Axel F off of the overall top 10 altogether. Then as far as the top 5 goes, at number 1 is Damsel, followed by Bridgerton Season 3. The Union moves up 1 spot to number 3, and Under Paris moves down 1 spot to number 4. Let's move on from the Netflix numbers to the latest numbers from Nielsen. Now these cover just domestic viewing. It's not global viewing, and they're delayed by about a month because that's just how Nielsen does things. So these are the numbers from August 26th to September 1st, and let's look first at the 10 most watched streaming movies. Netflix's The Deliverance comes in at number 1 at 10.58 million hours watched. That bumps The Union down to number 2. Migration stays on the chart at number 3. The Fall Guys debut on Peacock came in 4th place at 6.4 million hours watched, followed by the Netflix original film Incoming. Horizon: An American Saga Chapter 1 stays at number 6 on the list at 4.6 million hours watched. Then we have the debut of A Quiet Place Day 1 on Paramount Plus at 4.1 million hours watched. Logan Lucky and Trolls Band Together both stay on the top 10. And at number 10 is one of the Netflix sports documentaries, Untold: Sign Stealer, about the cheating scandal at the University of Michigan, which brought in 3.5 million hours watched to round out the top 10. And looking at the most watched streaming movies through September 1st, which is the data that we have from Netflix, Trolls Band Together moves up to number 4 above Beverly Hills Cop Axel F as far as the most watched movies of the year across streaming services that Nielsen measures. The Union moves up to number 6, which drops Inside Out down to number 7 and Roadhouse down to number 8. The Super Mario Bros. Movie remains the most watched movie across streaming services so far this year. Let's move now to the 10 most watched streaming shows for the week of August 26th through September 1st. At number 1 was Prison Break, which comes in at 19.8 million hours watched, and that was good enough to top the 3-episode premiere of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, which came in at 16.9 million hours watched. By my calculations, that's about a 20 to 25% drop off in viewership for the debut of season 1 to the debut of season 2, so we'll see what those numbers do in the weeks ahead. Family Guy comes in 3rd place, followed by A Discovery of Witches in 4th place. The Accident on Netflix debuts in 5th place at 14.85 million hours watched. Then we have Dark Winds at number 6, Bluey at number 7. Worst X Ever debuts on the list at 13.8 million hours watched, followed by Grey's Anatomy at number 9 and Bob's Burgers returning to the list at number 10. When we look at the week as far as watch time per available episode, Worst X Ever actually takes the crown. It brought in 3.46 million hours of watch time for each of its 4 episodes. Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power comes in 2nd place with 11 episodes, keeping in mind that they do not separate out on Nielsen viewership data by season. So this is across all episodes of the series. 1.54 million hours watched per episode for The Rings of Power. The Accident comes in at 1.49 million hours watched per episode, followed by Dark Winds at 1.24 million hours and Chaos at just over 1 million hours. A Discovery of Witches is in 6th place, followed by Love is Blind UK in 7th, Only Murders in the Building, which started its 4th season, at number 8, Preacher at number 9, and Prison Break rounding out the top 10. And when we look at the yearly charts as far as the most watched library streaming series on the various streaming services according to Nielsen, Bob's Burgers moves up to number 7 overall on this list, ahead of Suits. That's the only change on the top 10. The overall most watched library streaming series and the most watched streaming series so far here in the US this year is Bluey on Disney+, and it's not even particularly close at 667.3 million hours watched. Looking at the most watched original streaming series of the year, just a small shakeup here. Love Island moves to number 7. That moves Avatar: The Last Airbender down to number 8. The rest of the top 10 remains the same, including Bridgerton at number 1, which is the only original streaming series right now that is also one of the 10 most watched series overall for 2024. Fallout remains number 2, with The Boys at number 3. And that does it for Charts with Dan this week. Just a few things that are hitting streaming services and theaters near you this week. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre has a 50th anniversary re-release starting this Tuesday. It's a 4K restoration of the classic horror film, so you can see if it's playing around you and if tickets are available. On Wednesday, A24 is continuing to re-release some of its landmark films in IMAX, and they'll be re-releasing their remaster of the landmark music documentary Stop Making Sense. Also on Wednesday, we have the debut of Love is Blind Season 7 on Netflix. Then on Thursday, Mean Girls celebrates its 20th anniversary on what I believe is Mean Girls Day with a theatrical re-release through Fathom Events. It will also be available on Sunday night the 6th if you can't see it on Thursday. The Legend of Vox Machina Season 3 makes its debut on Prime Video this Thursday. The Critical Role animated series returns. I've heard some good things about this show. I've not actually ever watched it. Also on Thursday, Heartstopper Season 3, that's a name I actually did get wrong on the channel about a week and a half ago, makes its debut on Netflix. The teen drama returns as I do attempt to get the name right, and I will correct myself when I'm actually wrong. And then finally on Thursday, Gremlins The Wild Batch makes its debut on Max. This is a follow-up season to Gremlins Secrets of the Mogwai, so if you want more animated Gremlins, check Max on Thursday. Then coming out on Friday, of course, the big theatrical release is Joker: Folie à Deux. I will be seeing the fan preview event of the movie tonight. I'll have my review of the film up tomorrow right here on the channel. Also hitting theaters on Friday, I think, is the film White Bird. Years after trailers first hit theaters, it is finally coming out. This franchise spinoff of Wonder has been cursed when it comes to release dates, so at least you can scratch it off your list. Hitting some theaters this Friday is a movie called Monster Summer, starring Mel Gibson and Mason Thames as they fight to save their home on Martha's Vineyard from mysterious abducting monsters. I don't know. Looks like it might be kind of cool. Hitting limited release this Friday is The Outrun. Saoirse Ronan stars as a woman trying to rediscover her roots and get her life back together in a film that has generated a lot of Best Actress Oscar buzz for Saoirse Ronan. So if you want to be in the awards scene, this is probably a movie to put on your list. Then as far as streaming movies this Friday, Netflix had a huge pandemic-era hit with The Platform. Its sequel, The Platform 2, debuts this Friday. Then also on Netflix this Friday is a movie called It's What's Inside, which looks kind of interesting. A group of friends swaps bodies in a movie that already got some buzz on the festival circuit. So I may actually give that movie a shot because, I'm always looking for something new to watch. And that pretty much wraps us up for this week. Thank you so much for spending a big part of your day here with me. Don't forget about checking out those channel memberships down in the description below. And thanks, of course, to our sponsor, Chubbies. You can find out more about them in the description below. I'll see you right back here tomorrow with a review of Joker Folie à Deux. Later this week, I'll have my review of Saturday Night. I'll probably do a spoiler review for Joker this weekend. So it's another busy week here on the channel. Thanks again for watching. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.